The sonar operator stared at the screen and said nothing for almost 30 seconds. His supervisor leaned over his shoulder, expecting a glitch, a whale pod, maybe a submarine running dark. What they were both looking at didn't fit any of those categories. The return was massive, it was moving, and it was going down, fast, into a trench that, according to every chart they had, shouldn't have anything in it at all. That account comes from a former U.S. Navy sonar technician who served aboard a Pacific Fleet vessel in the early 2000s. He spent years not talking about what he saw. When he finally did, what he described wasn't just a strange reading on a screen. It was the beginning of something far larger, a pattern of encounters, anomalies, and classified data points that researchers and former intelligence analysts are now connecting to a single, staggering possibility: that something has built a base beneath the Pacific Ocean, and that it has been there for a very long time. Before we get into the specific evidence and the accounts that have surfaced in recent years, it's worth understanding just how little we actually know about the ocean floor. The Pacific alone covers more than 60 million square miles. It reaches depths of nearly 7 miles in the Mariana Trench. Despite all our technology, despite satellites and deep-sea submersibles and decades of naval operations, less than 20% of the world's ocean floor has been mapped in any meaningful detail. The rest is, quite literally, unexplored territory. If something wanted to remain hidden from human observation, the deep Pacific would be an almost perfect place to do it. And the reports suggest something has been doing exactly that. The phenomenon has a name: USO, Unidentified Submerged Object, and it has been documented in military records going back to at least the 1940s. Naval officers, submarine, crews, and maritime pilots have filed accounts of objects that enter the water from above at extraordinary speeds, travel beneath the surface without producing any detectable propulsion signature, and then simply vanish from instruments entirely. These aren't fringe testimonies from amateur observers. Many of these reports come from trained sonar operators, career military personnel, and officers who, by the nature of their work, understood exactly what conventional vessels look like on their equipment. And they were categorical. What they were tracking was not conventional. A declassified report from the Soviet Navy, obtained through research organizations in the post-Cold War era, describes multiple encounters in the Pacific and Atlantic basins where objects were tracked moving at speeds in excess of 200 knots underwater. For context, the fastest conventional submarine in the world tops out at around 45 knots on the surface. 200 knots beneath the ocean isn't just remarkable, it violates everything we understand about hydrodynamics and propulsion physics. The water resistance alone would destroy any known vessel. Something was doing it anyway. But here's where it gets more specific, and more difficult to dismiss. Researchers analyzing publicly available sonar mapping data and bathymetric surveys of the Pacific have identified a region roughly 500 miles off the coast of California, in an area sometimes referred to informally as the Pacific UAP Corridor, where anomalous readings have been recorded consistently over several decades. The seafloor geology in that region contains what some analysts describe as unusual structural formations, not volcanic, not consistent with known tectonic patterns, symmetrical in ways that natural formations rarely are. Former Navy sonar technician David Paulides, not to be confused with the missing persons researcher of the same name, testified in an online forum that he personally logged contacts in that general region on 3 separate deployments. Each time, the contacts were flagged. Each time, the flags were quietly removed from the official record. He describes one contact in particular as a return so large and so structured that his first instinct was that they had found a sunken city. Then it moved. The testimony of former intelligence analyst and UAP researcher Dr. Stephen Greer has long pointed toward a submerged dimension to the UFO phenomenon that mainstream coverage consistently underreports. According to Greer's accounts, multiple individuals who worked within classified government programs have described what they refer to as transmedium craft, vehicles capable of operating seamlessly in air, space, and water without any apparent transition cost. The physics of that, if true, would require a propulsion and hull technology so far beyond our own that the comparison becomes almost meaningless. Greer claims that internal documents he has reviewed specifically reference the Pacific as an area of concentrated transmedium activity, with sonar contacts logged and then reclassified at the highest levels. Now it's fair to ask, wowed, I there? What would make the deep Pacific specifically valuable to a non-human intelligence? The answers researchers have proposed are genuinely compelling. First, depth. The deeper sections of the Pacific, particularly around the Mariana and Philippine trenches, offer pressure and darkness that make surveillance from the surface essentially impossible without specialized equipment. Second, geothermal activity. The Pacific Ring of Fire generates enormous amounts of thermal energy, the kind of energy that, theoretically, a sufficiently advanced civilization might harvest indefinitely without any external fuel source. Third, isolation. The Central and Western Pacific are among the most logistically remote regions on Earth. Even if something were detected, the response time for any human military asset would be measured in hours, not minutes. And then there's the longevity question, because if you take the sum of these reports seriously, the sonar anomalies, the transmedium contacts, the structural formations on the seafloor, one of the more disturbing implications is that this isn't recent. Multiple researchers who study indigenous Pacific Islander traditions have noted that oral histories from Polynesian, Micronesian, and Melanesian cultures include consistent references to beings that came from and returned to the sea. Not metaphorical beings, described beings with physical characteristics, with craft, with purposes that the storytellers struggled to communicate in the language they had available. These traditions predate Western contact by centuries. Some of them predate written history entirely. If something has been operating beneath the Pacific for hundreds of years, or longer, it forces a genuinely uncomfortable recalibration of how we think about this planet and its inhabitants. The U.S. government's recent acknowledgments around UAP through the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office have focused almost exclusively on aerial phenomena. But researchers who have worked inside that process, or adjacent to it, have noted a conspicuous silence around the aquatic dimension. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence Christopher Mellon, who has been one of the most credible voices in the modern disclosure conversation, has acknowledged that transmedium behavior, objects entering and exiting the water, is part of the documented UAP picture. He stops short of specifics, but the acknowledgement itself is significant. These aren't birds. These aren't drones. Something is moving between our atmosphere and our oceans, and the people whose job it is to track threats to national security are aware of it. What does it mean if the base theory is correct? It means that the conversation we've been having about UAP, framed almost entirely around airspace, around radar, around military jets scrambled to intercept, has been missing half the picture, maybe more than half. It means that the most significant discovery in human history might not be found in the stars above us, but in the water beneath us. It means that oceans covering 70% of our planet's surface may have been occupied, in some capacity, by a non-human intelligence that has shown every indication of wanting to remain invisible. And here is the thought that's hardest to sit with. If something that advanced wanted to be found, it would have been found. The fact that it hasn't suggests a deliberate choice, a preference for concealment, which then raises the question every serious researcher in this field eventually arrives at. Who are they concealing themselves from? Us or someone else? The sonar operator who started this story eventually submitted a formal report through the chain of command. He never heard back. The contact was not listed in the deployment log. Years later, he looked up the coordinates on a public bathymetric database. The seafloor in that spot showed a feature that the database classified as a natural formation. He says it didn't look natural. He says it looked like an entrance. We are at a moment in history when the pressure for transparency around these phenomena is higher than it has ever been. Former officials are speaking. Documents are surfacing. The framework of denial that held for 7 decades is developing visible cracks. But the Pacific, vast, deep, and deliberately overlooked, may hold the most important piece of this puzzle. The question isn't whether something is down there. The question is whether we're ready to face what the answer actually means.